from Detect 5 and report into command point. We got a PD here, Tampa 1142. 243 assault on protection team.
Evacuate CD-17 at once. If not, I cannot make this contact.
Reward noted. Protection team member. Contact formation reserved.
Hey everyone, welcome back to another project series video. My name is Ron Lee Christianson with Blue Horse Studios, and today we're going to get started on a project for Coope Master and the Consumer Electronics Show coming up the first year. We have their HAF Stacker series case here that we're going to be modding into a Half-Life 3 theme build. So let's not waste any time, let's just jump right in and get started. Alright, looking at the case here guys, we have a 920 or 915 on the bottom here. This is the rear standard power supply version. We have the mid tower, which is the 925. And then on the top here, another 915, which was used as hard drive storage that Lee Harrington and I demoed at PAX. So what I'm doing right now is just doing a little bit of teardown on the case, removing some of the panels that we don't need. What I want to do is go ahead and get out my drill, start busting this case down completely, drill out all the rivets, sand this down, and get it ready for paint. So anytime that I'm doing a teardown on the case, one thing that I like to do, and I make a good habit of, is doing a parts labeling and screw labeling. It's really helpful when you try to put the case back together where you know which screws go where. So I just keep these little plastic bags handy, and then I label each one, set it aside, so that way when it comes to time to reassemble the case, you know exactly where everything is going. Okay, with the screws removed from the drive rails, they just pop right on off. Now we have access to some of the rivets. Now we can start drilling this case apart and get it sanded down. Alright, there's a few rivets here on the top. There's 2 in the back, a couple up front here, and then 4 of them here supporting this bracket as well. So I'm just going to go ahead and start drilling them out. Alright, I got the rear standard 915 pretty much tore down now. Got a couple rivets still here to remove, but it's just going to make it a lot easier when it comes time to paint if you do a complete teardown on your case. What I like to do is take everything down, take the factory finish completely off, take it down to bare metal. That way I know I have a good base for my first base coats and primer. So we've got a couple more rivets to remove, and then we can start sanding this down and maybe apply our first coat of paint in a couple hours. Okay, so we got the 915s completely tore down. This piece here is actually one entire piece of rolled steel, so that doesn't come apart. But when we put this back together, we're going to be using some copper rivets on this. So what I'm going to do right now is just get out my orbital sander and start sanding these panels down. Okay, so just like on the 915s that we just dismantled, on the 925 here, you have the same sliding locking mechanism, these guide rails here that need to be removed before you can get at a couple of the rivets. And we have them both on the top and the bottom. So I'm going to start removing those, and we'll start riveting out some of the panels. Inside December's issue of CPU Magazine, there's a great article and a review on the Coope Master HAF Stacker series. There's also been some great video reviews out there done by Linus Tech Tips, Tech Power Ups, and a few others. And then on the back of the magazine of December's issue is one of the PCs that Lee and I demoed. This was quite a surprise when I received the issue this month. I wasn't expecting to see that on the back of the article. And it's a nice little feature. So this is basically the case that we're breaking down right now. This is the actual case that we're tearing down right now, is the pic that you see here. So what we're doing right now is go in and remove that 240 rad that Lee and I installed, and remove these hard drive cages, tear all this down, and get it ready for paint. Right now we're just going to start removing the 5 1/4 base here. This is held in with a couple screws and some rivets from the back. Okay, with the bottom 5 1/4 bay removed, now I can go ahead and remove the 240 rad. Alright, with those screws removed, the rad will just kind of simply slide out the front here. And this rad is actually from one of the AIOs the Coope Master used for the demo, but I'm possibly thinking about reusing this for the build. I'm going to go ahead and drain this out, flush it, and get the rest of the fluid out of it. Okay, with the rad removed, now I can go ahead and remove the top 5 1/4 bay. Alright, on the front here, what we need to do is go ahead and, I don't think I'm going to use a front mounted radiator here, so what I want to do is go ahead and cut this whole entire mounting system out. The easiest way to do that is continue to break down this case until I'm just have the front panel available, and then once I remove that, then I can have easier access with my Dremel, and then we can go ahead and cut this whole piece out. So what I'm going to do is continue breaking down the case. We got a few more rivets to do to remove the top, the front, and the back, and the bottom, and the motherboard tray. Okay, so I removed all the rivets from the top panel, and this piece should just slide off easily, and it does. Now we're just going to go ahead and remove the motherboard tray, the back and front panels. Alright, with those rivets removed, the motherboard tray should just slide right on out. Alright, so the case is almost completely broken down. We just have the rear and front panel to remove. And I'm just going to flip this over to get access to the rivets on the bottom, drill them out, and then remove those panels as well. Or with the front panel removed, it's going to be a lot easier for me to cut this area out now. So I'm just going to mask this off and go ahead and Dremel this all out. Alright, so I'm just going to go ahead and use a cutting disc, get in this tight area here to cut this area out. Alright, so we just went ahead and cut away the found Manny bracket and the rad bracket there. And this is kind of what we're left with that we're going to reuse. These are the 2 front mounting supports that's going to be riveted back in. What I need to do now is just take this over to my bench sander, sand all these pieces down, make sure they're all smooth, and file it down, and then get these things ready for paint as well. Alright, I got my pieces laid out here for the 925, and what I'm starting to do right now is go ahead and remove the factory finish. I'm using my orbital sander with some 40 grit paper, and I just want to take this down to bare metal so I have a good foundation for my first primer and paint coats. Okay, I went over the top of the panels with a couple coats of light primer, and once he's dry we'll finish it up with a little bit of wet sanding and start riveting the panels back together. Okay, I started reassembling the case now, and I'm using these copper rivets to secure the panels back together. And then once we finish this up, then I can start laying down my first base coats of color and start thinking about some of the effects panels that we're going to create on this Half-Life build. Okay, I got the 925 pretty much put back together now. I'm just kind of working on the 915s here. And the reassembly process on these cases are very easy. It's one of the easier cases I've ever taken apart and put back together. And like I said before, we're using the copper rivets to secure these back together because we're going to kind of go for an industrial theme with the paint scheme once we finish all this up. Okay, so I moved on to working on the motherboard tray here, and what I have is a 1/8 inch piece of plastic that I'm going to rivet to the side of the motherboard tray. We're going to carve in some panel lines and create some custom lighting in here as well, and then we're going to create a platform right above this that we're going to float our SSDs on. So what I need to do next is go ahead and just start carving in and cutting out my panel lines, create the platform, and then make the mounts for the SSDs, and then we can move on to installing a custom paint job. Alright, so I finished cutting out my panels here, and got the first one cut out, got all my scribe lines cut in. I just used a scriber bit to cut in the first channel, and then just took a small screwdriver to make the bevels in the lines, and then I just went over the top of it with 150 grit paper to sand it all smooth. And then the second piece here, we're just going to mount right over the top like this and kind of just float it above the surface about maybe an inch, inch and a half. And then we'll mount the SSDs in these 2 areas here. And then we cut out these 2 channels here. They're going to go back behind the motherboard tray for our cable management. Okay, I'll be using the Kingston HyperX 120 gigabyte SSDs for this part of the build. And we just finished our little panel here, and what I need to do is go ahead and create these little sleds that are going to slide right onto this panel here, and then our SSDs will mount in that position just like so. And once we finish that up, we can go ahead and start working on our first coats of primer, and then maybe start thinking about a paint job. Alright, I finished up all the raw construction here on our effects panel. We're also going to run some of our water cooling tubing right down the center of this panel here when it comes time to do that. What I want to do at the moment right now is Go ahead and get this mounted up inside the case, make sure everything is fitting properly, do a dry fit, and then we'll pull it back out and we'll install some LEDs behind these panels to illuminate the whole area and give it a nice glow effect. So let's go ahead and get this mounted up inside the case. Okay, so what I've done here is just installed the panel inside the case here momentarily and just dry fitting everything together and making sure it's fitting properly. The next step in the process is working on some of the LEDs that are going to illuminate these panels here. So what I'm going to do is just take everything back out, start working on some LEDs and some effects lighting that are going to go behind these panels here. Okay, I'm going to get started on the sleeving and the wiring for my VANDAL switches. I have two of them here. I have one with amber center illumination and then one with the white ring illumination. And the VANDAL switches come with their wires here and they connect by a spade connector into the appropriate fittings into the back, appropriate connections. And what we're going to do is we're going to cut off the spade connectors and make some hard connections with some solder. So I'm heating up my soldering iron, we'll get those attached, and then we'll do some sleeving on the wires. And then we'll start working on the front bezel and getting that constructed and then get these installed. Alright, here's the instructions for wiring on the VANDAL switch. We're using the 16mm here, and we're going to start with wiring the LEDs. The very top of the LED on the VANDAL is your positive, and the very bottom terminal is your negative, and we're going to solder those 2 points into the connectors right now. Okay, I have the positive and negative side for the LED illumination soldered in. Now I'm just going to apply a little bit of heat shrink over the top of this and then start working on the power connections. Okay, I finished all the wiring on the VANDAL switches. I got them wired to the motherboard header on this test motherboard, and I'm just going to go ahead and just power this on, make sure everything is working properly. And you can see the ring illumination. We have the white for our reset, and obviously the orange is going to be our power. And once the motherboard goes through its boot sequence, I'm going to go ahead and do a reset and make sure that button is working properly. Alright, let's go ahead and do the reset. And the reset works properly as well. So what I'm going to go ahead and do is just go ahead and power all this down, start working on some of the sleeving, and then we can start working on the front bezel. Okay, I have the front bezel here, and what I want to do is just go ahead and kind of create my own custom panel on this. In the first part of the video I cut out the fan mounts and radiator mount because I'm not going to have a front mounted radiator or any fans on the front side of this case. So I cut that area out, and we're going to go ahead and create some custom panels to go in place. And I'm starting to work on this piece of 1/8 inch ABS, and that's just going to mount just right over that area there. And then we're going to install our 2 VANDAL switches in here. I'll still need to go in and create a lot of custom panels to hold all these pieces together and give the panels just some detail and just kind of make everything kind of blend together. So that's what I'm working on right now. Doing a little bit more work here on the front bezel. I went in and just added some panel effects and making these little kind of static latches here just for some panel effect detail. I'm just going in and adding a little bit more detail to these panel lines. And then we're getting pretty close to adding our first coat of primer to this. Okay, I finished the front bezel here, and I just applied a couple coats of some automotive primer, and I just kind of going in and doing a little bit of finish sanding on this. I'll apply a couple more coats in just a little bit. What I want to start working on right now is the panel that's going to go behind the front bezel and attach to the SSD mounts, and it's going to attach just like so. So what I need to do is just go in and start just making all my little custom panels and detail lines, and then adhere the 2 panels together and get installed inside the case. Alright, I'm starting to work on the panel that's going to go behind the front bezel, and I'm just marking out the panel lines, and I'll use my scriber bit to go in and scribe all these lines out, and then use my small little chisel to chisel in the bevel into the panel lines to give it a nice kind of detailed finish like you see here on this panel. So I'm going to go ahead and continue working on that and get it completed, and we can attach the 2 panels together. Now I'm just taking my screwdriver and just going in and adding the bevel to the panel lines just to give it a little bit more detail and depth to it. And it takes a few passes to get this right, and then once we finish with that, we'll just go over with some light sandpaper and clean up the lines, make sure they're perfectly straight. And then we'll start working on some of the other panel details, and then finish it off with a primer coat and a paint job. I jumped ahead here a little bit, guys. What we have is the case door here. What I need to do right now is go ahead and drill out some of the areas in here so we can mount our acrylic window inside here temporarily. I'm going to leave this area open down along the bottom here. We're going to have that open, available for venting. I'm going to crease these little grills. They're going to keep continuing across this panel here. And then right over there on the right hand side we have Gordon Freeman's Black Mesa ID badge that's going to be illuminated with a white LED when I connect it to the 12 volt power. But we're getting pretty close to installing first coats of primer. But what I want to do right now is, like I said, is go ahead and drill out those mounting holes for the acrylic window. Okay, I just went ahead and attached the side case door. What I'm doing here is just making sure everything is fitting properly and none of these pieces are making contact with the front part of the bezel, and making sure everything is just sliding back and forth properly. Everything looks pretty good. What I want to do right now is move to the opposite side of the case and work on the back case door. Finish that up, make it kind of match what we're doing here, and then I can get started on the two 915s. The top one is going to be for our rad box and the bottom one for our hard drive storage. So let's go ahead and get started on the back case door. Okay, I'm starting working on the side panel here, and I got some 1/8 inch ABS plastic, and then we're going to adhere it to the side panel and create this whole industrial look to kind of simulate the Half-Life look. What I want to do right now is go ahead and take these panels here, start creating some custom rivets inside these panels, some panel lines. We'll create some steam lines. Finish it off with some LEDs and a few other things, and we'll do a paint finish over the top of that once it's all done. Okay, I got the back panel here, and I started laying down some effects panels using some 1/8 inch polystyrene. I just want to build up off of these areas here and create some conduit lines and some steam lines. We're going to build some power module boxes in these areas here, maybe with some LEDs. Kind of just go for that whole Half-Life 3 industrial look. And so what I'm going to do is just start cutting out some panels, start getting them applied, and then once we finish that up we can install our first coats of primer. Alright, what I'm doing right now is just creating some effects panels to go across the case door here, and I'm using a 1/8 inch polystyrene for this part of the build. And we'll secure this down with some epoxy once we get these complete. What I want to do right now is go ahead and sand these down, create some of these faux rivet marks that I'm using here in this part of the build, and create these into the panels, sand them down, create a little bevel on the edges here, and then get them installed. And then once we finish up with that, we can start working up in here in some of these areas. So we're going to create like a power module box with some conduit lines, some LEDs, and just a few other things. So let's go ahead and finish this part of the building. Alright, what I want to do right now is just go ahead and sand around the edges of the polystyrene and just create a bevel, and it just gives a nice complete finished look to it. And then we'll go in and we'll do all the little custom rivets inside here. Alright, I got some of my pieces cut out, and I got my panel lines all scribed in. What I'm going to do right now, I already have the areas marked out for where I'm going to go ahead and use my countersink bit to create these custom rivets. So I'm going to take these pieces over to my drill press and drill in all these little custom rivets that I have pre-marked. Alright, I have the depth set on my drill press. Now I'm going to go ahead and apply the rivet holes. Alright, and that's kind of what we're left with. And now I'll just do a little bit of finish sanding and clean that up and then install it to the case. Alright, I got my pieces finished up. Now I'm going to start adhering them to the panel. And there's several ways that you can adhere your pieces to the panel. What I like to do is use quick set and epoxy. I've also used JB Weld. They make two types. They have one for steel. I believe they also have one for wood, and then also a brand for plastic as well. And you can also, if you wanted to, use a Loctite or any type of CA glue, but the thing about the super glue or any CA glue is that it becomes brittle over time, so I don't recommend any of this for your structural foundation. I always use super glue for the novelty pieces. And then you have your weld-on solvent glue, which is actually a welding solvent. It actually adheres the polystyrene and the ABS together. What I'm going to do is go ahead and go with the epoxy setting. This is what I like to use on all the structural pieces. We're going to mix some of this up, apply it to the panels, and go ahead and attach it to the case door. Okay, I installed these little static latches here, and what I want to work on right now is start working on that conduit box that's going to go through here, and we're going to have some steam lines and conduit lines wrap into it, and we'll install some LEDs inside there as well. So what I need to do is start cutting out the panels, start building up the structure supports in this area, and then get it all attached together. Okay, I'm continuing to do some work across the panel here. I went and added these little vent fins, the latches, and I'm working on these little power modules right now. I went and installed a couple LEDs, and what I need to do right now, before I adhere this to the panel, is solder these lines in, drill a hole through the back panel, and feed the lines down through where we're going to mount it to our power supply. And then this piece is just going to mount just right on the side panel, and we're going to have a couple hoses attaching each power module. Okay, I went ahead and soldered the lines together and used a little bit of heat shrink and cable sleeving to dress up the lines. This whole part is not even going to be seen when we adhere it to the panel. These lines are going to come back through the back of the case and then down into where our power supply is, so we can hook it up to our power supply, and I'll attach a Molex pin to the end of these lines here. So let's go ahead and get this adhered to the side of the panel. Alright, we just went ahead and finished up the side panel. I applied a couple coats of primer and did a little bit of light sanding and attached it to the side of the case. What we need to start working on right now is the top rad box, so let's go ahead and get started. Okay, I'm starting to do some work on the 915 now. This is going to be our rad box. I did some assembly on the side of the case. I went in and did a little bit of the paneling detail. We still got quite a bit more that we need to do on here. We still need to create the latches, some of the fan covers. And then right now what I'm working on is the top of the 915. We're going to mount our reservoir right on top with the fan controller and the pump and everything. We're kind of going to go for this whole industrial look. And I'm trying to simulate the gravity gun from the Half-Life build with the reservoir as its core reactor. Alright, I started constructing these panels here. I'm using a little bit of the polystyrene and ABS for support. And what these are going to be mounted on top of is the 915, and our reservoir is going to slide right inside these. And I'm going to kind of simulate the look of the Citadel in the Half-Life games. And we'll finish this off with a little bit more paneling detail, some rivets, and then of course a paint job. Alright, I'm finishing up all the raw construction here on the res tower. And I went in with all these little pearl rivets and made it all these little custom rivets here. What we're going to do now is do a little bit of light sanding, a little bit of putty work, and then go ahead and add a first coat of primer. Alright, I made this custom door to just go right back over the back door of the control panel area. This is going to be the area for our fan controller and our temp sensor. And I already drilled out the lines for power to go down into the rad box. So what I need to do now is go ahead and finish up a little bit more of my sanding and putty work, and then we'll install our first coats of primer. Alright, I just finished this off with a couple coats of primer, and I noticed there's a couple gaps in here that still needed some putty, so I'm going to go ahead and finish that off, and then we can get started on the front panel. Alright, I just went ahead and installed the reservoir temporarily. I just want to make sure everything is fitting properly inside the housing here. And everything seems to be fitting great, so I'm just going to go ahead and take this apart, finish doing some of the wet sanding on this piece here, finish up the putty work on the reservoir mount, and get these two pieces attached, and then start thinking about a paint job. Alright, I have the front bezel here on the one of the 915s that we're going to use for our rad box, and I'm using a piece of 1/8 inch ABS plastic, and we're going to epoxy this to the front here, and we're going to create all the panel effects, kind of like what we did on the 925. So what I need to do right now is go ahead and start scribing out these lines, create all my little faux rivets, and then we can start building up some of the panel effects, and then add a paint finish, or excuse me, a first primer coats over the top of this surface here. Alright, with my lines already marked out, what I'm going to do is just use my scriber bit and go ahead and just scribe all these lines in. And then I'll take my small little screwdriver and then just kind of just bevel in those lines to give it a nice kind of beveled finish. So let's go ahead and get started on that. I usually make probably about 4 or 5 passes with the scriber bit. And then I go in with the chisel or the small little screwdriver, and it works as a chisel. And kind of cut in the bevel into the ABS to give it a nice finish. And once those lines are kind of defined there, I can just take my my small little screwdriver, that acts as a small chisel, and just kind of carve out a bevel in that plastic. It gives it a really nice finish to it. And then once we finish with that, then I go right over the top of this with some 150 grit paper and just finish it off with a couple coats of primer, and then it's ready for paint. Alright, so I went ahead and added all the little rivet holes, did a little bit of light sanding over the top of the panel, and I went in and I cut out the mesh grill here, and we're going to go ahead and adhere the 2 panels together, and I'm going to use some quick setting epoxy to do so. And once we get done with that, we can start adding a little bit more panel effects, and then spray this over with a couple coats of primer and set it aside and get ready for paint. Right now I'm working on these little latches. I'm just going to adhere them to the side of the panel. I just need to go ahead and cut that angle down and then attach it with a little bit of solvent glue. Alright, I scored the polystyrene, that way I could bend it a little bit, and I'm just going to use a little bit of the welding solvent. This actually welds the plastic together. It doesn't glue it, it welds it together. And just apply it into the position that I want, and it dries within seconds. And dries clear, very thin, and just requires just a little bit of sanding just to clean up those edges. Now we can go ahead and make the little custom bolts that are going to go right over the top of those 4 mounts. Alright, I started work on the front bezel here, and we're working on these custom latches right now. I cut these pieces of ABS down to 1 inch by 1.5 inches, and we're going to start working on the mounts that are going to attach to the side doors of the 915. Alright, I'm filing the edges down on these little latches that I'm making. That way they make a nice connection when I start making the pieces that go to the side. They have a nice bevel to the edge, and there's no gap in the seam there. So that's what I'm working on right now, and then we'll start creating these the panels, the 4 panels that will attach to the sides of the 915. Alright, I finished these little custom latches that go on the top of the 915 on the front bezel. Now I'm starting to work on the ones that go onto the side on the case doors that will come in on the sides. These are just static latches. These won't actually function. They're just more for aesthetics and looks to kind of go with the whole Half-Life theme that we're doing here. But I just need to construct 4 more of these, create the little latch panels that go on there, and then we can start thinking about our first coats of primer on these. Alright, I'm just finishing up the final work on these little latches here, and then we can move on to finishing some of the panels here on the case doors. We're getting pretty close to finishing up the raw construction on this project and move on to the final coats of primer, coat, and paint. Alright guys, we went ahead and finished off all the raw construction and did a little bit of primer coat and rough sanding across these panels here. What I need to do right now is start mixing up some base coat, start working down some color, some base coats, apply all my panel effects, my paint effects, get the water cooling installed, and install the system. And we'll pick that up in the second part of this video. We got about 3 days until we need to ship this off to Cooler Master in the Consumer Electronics Show the first year. So appreciate you guys tuning in. I'll see you in the next update.
Zero notice. Protection team member. Your family cohesion is preserved.